Hey guys, and welcome back to the Same Shit Different Day podcast. I am your host, Sacramento, and we have a great show for you guys today. And a guest today on our second episode of the podcast. It's been a great run so far, and hope to give you guys a lot more content in the future. But without further ado, let's introduce our guest.
So my name is Andrew. When I retired, I medically retired from the military. I was a staff sergeant. I was up for my first look at sergeant first class, and I came in as a PV2. So when you join the military, they have this.
What's a PV2?
So there's a couple, there's different ranks of private, right? And there's a test you can take. So there's private, and then private first class, right? Then specialist. It's essentially you can kind of skip. Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to find something for you. I want to get an actual. I'm gonna give you the official name. So when you first join, right, affectionately, as we would call someone, a fuzzy patch. So if you look in the middle of someone's uniform, there's a patch where they can put their rank on the uniforms. And if they're an E1, which is just a private, they have nothing, right? It's just a fuzzy patch. So we just call them fuzzies. And then when you first join, that's what you're going to come in as. Now, if you have a degree, you might be able to, if you have a degree or some kind of level of education and you're joining as enlisted, not as an officer, you might be able to come in as a specialist, which is an E4. So they'll bump you up a couple ranks, right? They have a test you can take if you go learn the ranks, and you can do at least 30 push-ups and sit-ups, some entry level stuff. Then you'll come in as an E2, which is just one rank up. It doesn't really make any difference. It really doesn't make your career change any more or less, because there's time and grade and time and service requirements for promotion. But it's just kind of, it's a little thing. So rather than coming in as a fuzzy, I took a quiz, I did some push-ups, and I came in as a PB2, which is just an E2, second rank of private. And then it's the little mosquito wings, right? So it's just the inverted V.
So, we'll get into a little bit about how big you got later on, but how big were you here, physical wise? This was nothing but just a simple stroll in the park for you to do a physical challenge?
No, man. So when I joined the military, I was actually really overweight, and I could not pass my PT test in basic training. I passed my PT test on the very last day possible to be able to graduate.
Wow.
They for people that have failed them, they have on family day, which is the day your family shows up. They have a PT test on the morning of family day, at least when I went through. And I hadn't passed a record PT test until the morning of family day.
Wow. So, well, how was that? That was a lot of pressure, I'm guessing.
Oh man, it was terrible. And so I don't know if they do it anymore, but it's just kind of a way to motivate you. So when you're in basic, when I went through, right, which was 2007, right, so a while ago, you get marshmallows, which is what they call the PTs. It's a sweatsuit, right? It's gray sweatpants and a top, just a regular, and it just says Army on it, right? And those are your marshmallow PTs. And then they had PTs that we called high speeds, which were a tracksuit, and it was gray with the zip up, and it has some reflective stuff on it. And you weren't allowed to wear your high speed PTs until you passed a PT test. So when you were marching around in formation for PT, you had the marshmallows, which were the fatties that couldn't pass a PT test. And then you had the high speeds, which were people that already passed one. So imagine family day, literally the day of graduation, and I'm marching out to a PT test wearing the marshmallow suit with 3 other fatties. You know what I mean? And you're just they call it motivation, but really it's kind of hazing, right? But it worked. It worked for me. I was like, dude, I gotta wear this other PT suit. I can't be out here looking like a marshmallow. So
what made you join the military in the first place then?
There's like a little bit of a family tradition of serving on both of my grandparents served. My grandpa on my dad's side, British. My grandpa on my mom's side was in the army.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there was kind of a little bit of that. And then it was really just a personality thing. I've always been a protector of other people and like to stand up for people. So
Mm-hmm.
I was going to college. And I wasn't really enjoying the college life. It just, you know, classes are a little easy. I don't really like doing homework, so I just show up and take tests. I was working
So
a
a little bit
shitty
of
job.
Goodwill Hunting attitude, right?
Yeah, it
It's
was
like,
just, I wasn't doing poorly. I just wasn't
mm-hmm.
enjoying it. And then, one day in between classes, I'm like walking to the cafeteria or something, and there's an army table there, and they're just like, "Hey, let me talk to you." So I stopped, I talked, I went and took the ASVAB.
Well, at that point, you knew just the Army. You didn't want to do the Marines, the Air Force, nothing
No,
like that?
so it's actually funny. So I thought Army over anything else because that's what my grandpa was in.
Uh-huh.
But my mom's boyfriend at the time was in the Air Force. Not then, but he had been in the Air Force. He was retired, and he was a mechanic on like C-130s. And when
Mm-hmm.
when he found out, he was like, "Hey man, just do yourself a favor and talk to an Air Force recruiter." And
Mm-hmm.
so I went to the little, you go to a recruiting station in like a strip mall, and usually it's like Marines, Army, Air Force, has all of them in a row, right? They're all side by
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Man, the freaking Air Force was out to lunch, and that should have been my first indicator that that's who I should have went with. They
Yeah.
actually take breaks and care. The Army and the Marines, man, they were in there working. No lunch for you.
No
So,
lunch.
but so I
Wow.
didn't talk to the Air Force. I just went into the Army. I talked to them. I did a little sample ASVAB. They have like a little thing you take on a computer in there. It gives them an idea of how well you're due. And I crushed it. So there's like, the guy's like, you could pretty much just pick any job you want. You could take the real
Mm-hmm.
ASVAB. And I want to say from when I talked to that guy at school on like a Wednesday, I
Mm-hmm.
took my ASVAB on like that Saturday or Friday. It was a couple days, and I shipped in 3 weeks. So from when I
Wow.
talked to the recruiter to when I left for basic was maybe 30 days. It came out of nowhere. My family was like, what just happened? Came home from
And
school one day, and I was like, well, I'm going to have my own apartment, but I went to visit my mom, and I was like, hey, I'm dropping
yeah.
out of college, and I'm joining the Army. Oh, okay, when you
Wow.
leaving? Couple weeks. Jesus. So,
And how was that? Because I've seen, I mean, we've talked about this before about how just like arriving to boot camp, we've seen those different, the
so I
Army,
mean,
how they did it. How did that feel for you?
the whole process was a little crazy, especially with how fast I did it. So from going down and taking the ASVAB, my recruiter drives me down there. They're like, oh, you have 4 hours to take it. I finished the test in like 40 minutes. I called him. He wasn't even back to the recruiting station yet. And he's like, what do you mean
Wow.
you're done? You're going to bomb it. I ended up getting like a 91 or a 96, something ridiculous.
Jeez.
Right. Crushed it. So he was like, okay, well, you can pick whatever you want. So I picked an Intel job. Right.
Uh-huh.
He had no clue what it was. He's like, it has a clearance and it's Intel.
It's
so
above his clearance.
yeah. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'll take it, and and from there, you go to MEPS, which is like the entry processing, like the medical entry processing. Right. And they get everyone going to MEPS. You go to a hotel the night before, cause you got to be at MEPS at like 5 a.m. So they take there's maybe like a group of 20 people, and it was
What's
Army,
MEPS
Air
again? I'm
Force,
sorry?
Marines. It's like military entry processing station or something. It's essentially medical expenditure panel survey.
Okay.
It's where they take like the intake for the Army. It's a bunch of tests, and they have you do all this stuff to make sure you could, that you're prepared to pass basic. But it's not just for the Army, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they take everyone who was going to MEPS that day. They put us in this crappy little motel. And it was a bunch of kids my age, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? No one was over like 24. And it was Army, Air Force, Marines, everything. We're all there. And they're like, hey, don't party. And then they just left. So they gave like 20 kids hotel rooms and then bounced. So, of course, we all partied. Everybody's getting drunk. Well, no one had a car. So one of the kids that was joining the Marines, ran to a gas station a mile and a half down the road, bought a bunch of booze, came back. There was a pretty even number of males and females, so we all ended up kind of like swapping. So I had like a male in my room. It was two beds to a room, And then like, so me and him are hanging out, right? You're like in your little, this is my roommate pair. And then we met up with like 2 chicks that had their own room, and we all kind of looked at each other and was like, you and her, me and her, and then just swapped.
So was
right?
Fuzzy still your nickname, or what nickname did you
No,
have
no,
around
no.
this time?
So at that point, I mean, no one even has a rank. You're going into MEPS, right? So nothing's
Right.
happened. So it's just a bunch of kids getting ready to join the military, having one last hurrah.
Okay.
So everyone goes and gets drunk. A bunch of people hook up. It's a terrible plan. You wake up early, hungover, and you got to go to MEPS. And MEPS is like, it's the first time you're introduced to this weird military complex thing.
Oh,
So you
wow.
go in there, and they're like, all right, like everyone has to pee. And they got this old dude that has to watch you pee to make sure that you're not like trying to fudge a drug test or something or pass it. So like, you know, up the night before, you're a civilian, you're partying, you're banging it out, whatever. And then all of a sudden you got this 7-year-old dude squatting in front of you watching you pee. And you're like, this is, and it's underwear to the floor, right? So it's not just like a regular, it's weird. And, you know, it's like in a white tile bathroom. It looks like an insane asylum. And then everyone's standing around in underwear, guys and girls. And they're having you do this weird shit. They're like, hey, squat down and walk like a duck, because they're testing your ankles. So you got to do like this duck waddle to make sure your ankles bend a certain way. Because if you have bad ankles, they're not going to let you in the military. So it's just this weird, insane asylum feeling thing where everyone's standing around in underwear while some 70-year-old man has you waddle like a duck and watches you pee. It's
honestly, just putting it in a perspective
awkward,
like
bro.
that, like, yeah, everyone's standing in line. You guys know what's gonna happen. You just got to build up the courage to kind of, wow, that's
dude, it's just weird, and that's before anything. That's to even determine if they'll let you in. You know, so that's right. So you do that. If you make it through all that, right, you can waddle like a duck. Your pee isn't funny. You know, your elbows aren't bad. They don't, you know, they ask you all these medical questions. It's like this big process. You make it through there. You get a date and time. You jump on a plane. You fly out. And then there's like the classic, you know, it's the classic Shark Week that you see in the movies. You know, you get picked up from an airport on like a white army bus, and you got all your bags, and you're not even in basic yet. Like the first week or two is you're getting like issued gear and clothes, and you're just treated like nothing. So everyone, you know, everyone goes and gets their head buzzed. They all get their hair cut. Everyone gets issued all their gear. They're just yelling at you and screaming at you. It's just this like pre-basic, like treated like crap. Stand in a line, nuts to butts. No one fall asleep. Wake, they're just yelling at you the whole time. You're like, wow.
So Hollywood has really just shown it how it really is.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a little different now than when I went through, but it really is. I didn't do any research because I'm stupid. I didn't look up anything. I didn't go, oh, like, what's basic going to be like? I just got on a freaking plane and then got on a bus, and here I am. So I'm not prepared for this, like, just screamed at, you know, you're standing in line, memorize the Soldier's Creed, memorize this, you should know this, you should always be yelling at you. All of that's just to get gear, man. And you don't even go to basic yet. And then once a class is ready and you have all your gear, you're on like one part of base it's like the entry, right? Like you're getting in processed. And then they bus you over to like the basic training grounds. And that's the Shark Week. You're on the bus, you get off, the drill sergeants are all yelling, you're holding your bag over your head. They're like having you dump stuff out and just scream at you. And it's chaotic, you know, and it's kind of funny thinking back as a now older person. I'm like, wow, like that was kind of hilarious. But when you're in it and you're like an 18-year-old kid and you have no clue what you're doing, you know, you're kind of just like, wow, that's like the first, you're like, I might have made a mistake. Like, I don't know if I should have done this.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a mental game. They're trying to break you down, right? They're trying to make you into a different, a warrior, a soldier, you know?
Exactly. They need to turn you into someone that can follow orders and just do as you're told without asking.
So where was your first deployment?
So the first time I left the country wasn't on deployment. I was doing like an exercise, and I went to Kuwait.
Oh, wow.
And Kuwait is, some people will call it a deployment. Kuwait's not a deployment. And the reason I say that is I'm not trying to like sauce anybody who's been to Kuwait and that they call it a deployment, but it's actually a duty station. You can get stationed in Kuwait. There's permanent residence there, so you're going to go for like 2 or 3 years. They have barracks. If someone can get stationed there, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a deployment, right? I'm not even talking about the difference between like a combat deployment and non-combat deployment. I'm not a combat guy. I'm not an infantryman. I didn't do, you know what I mean? So that's not even going down that route. Just if you can get stationed there, it's not a deployment. So I was there twice on exercises, once in Egypt on exercise, and then I did technically get put on a deployment where they sent me to Kuwait, and I didn't consider it a deployment. But so my first time out of the country was at Camp Arif John in Kuwait.
So what was life like that with, people you knew? Was anyone there from base camp, or completely different people?
No. So in basic training, there was only one other intelligence analyst. There was one other person with my job, right? So, and I never saw that guy again after basic. But it's not a common MOS. There's not a lot of us, right? So it was a bunch of truck drivers and, random support MOSs. Because if they were infantrymen, they would have gone to like Fort Benning, and they would have gone to OSIT, which is a combination of basic and their advanced training. So it was just a bunch of like infantrymen, truck drivers, repair people, satellite, whatever, cooks. There was one other MI guy. So it's pretty separated. The exercises were with my unit. So it would be, they would take like, oh, this company is going to go on an exercise, and we're going to go set up like a sample skiff and we're like practicing as if we were going to deploy somewhere and setting up all the intelligence stuff. So you got to like triple strand Constantino wire, make a little camp, get the truck set up that have the access to the NSA net, all this stuff. It's kind of just like a practice run, right?
Right.
You do that, you do a couple like drills, like practice, and you go home. Maybe you're there for a couple months, right? So you do a couple of those, nothing crazy. It was pretty interesting though. They had us in these little, like, I would call them buildings, but they weren't really buildings, and it's just a bunch of bunk beds. You get to sleep for a little bit, then you go back to the tent. It's nothing crazy. It wasn't anything dangerous, but it's definitely kind of just like it's kind of like you see it in the movies, right? It's a bunch of tents everywhere. Everybody's walking. There might be like a bus that'll take you around base. Everyone goes to the chow hall together, and it's almost like summer camp, man.
I think it's like I think I remember seeing Black Hawk Down. They had those camps set up. Yeah, no, I know exactly. Now that you mentioned that's what it was. That's
and that's that's going to be a different experience for everybody, right? So obviously, if you are out on some little fob somewhere, or you were in like you're an infantryman, or you're attached to an armor unit, and you're out going outside the wire, and you're doing combat missions, and you're in these little like makeshift camps, these bases, someone's going to have a different experience. But like Camp Arif John, a lot of the big bases, Bagram, right? Bagram Airfield, they've got a Starbucks on them, man. They've got McDonald's and Burger King. Like you're not roughing it. So
the generals are eating good.
It's a different experience for everybody. The generals, dude, flag officers have their own porta potties that you're not supposed to use. You know what I mean? They got air conditionings in them. It's a joke. So everybody's going to have a different experience, but that was my first, out of the country trip. And I would kind of relate that to like summer camp. You know what I mean? So
did the Army send you anywhere else?
Yeah. So I went to, like I said, Kuwait 2 or 3 times. I had one exercise in Egypt. I went on a deployment where I was in Jordan, and we were on a Jordanian airbase. And then that was kind of right there on the border of Syria. And we had a couple little trips into Syria. And that was my first, I would say, like real deployment. Again, not a combat guy, not running combat missions, but that was the first, like, I was there for over 6 months. I was working in a tent that we set up. We built a skiff. We had armed guards, XYZ, whatever. So that was kind of, not summer camp, but also, not terribly dangerous because we were on a foreign base. for a majority of it. Like I said, a few little trips into Syria, did some stuff in a tent, but
So at any time did you ever feel like something might happen where you have to, potentially fight your way out of something, or it was always just kind of easygoing day for you?
so not necessarily fight my way out, but when we were in Jordan, and I can't go into like the methods of knowing, but we
Mm-hmm.
found out that there was like a rebel faction in Syria and all this stuff going on there, and we knew that they knew where we were, and they were like, "Hey, we've got these chemical missiles. What do you think about using them?"
Mm-hmm.
So for like a month, the deputy commander of where we were was like, everyone has to have their mop gear on their person at all times, and that's the protective chemical gear. So it's like the gas mask, the hooded suit, the gloves, the boots. It's a giant bag full of shit that's really
Oh
heavy
wow.
and super annoying. And for a month, they were like, we are actually under the threat of chemical attack. You must carry it with you everywhere, whether you're
So it
working or not.
what would these chemicals, like, let's say worst case scenario, what would these chemicals do to you if they were deployed on you
I mean,
guys?
I didn't ever see the threat assessment for what they actually had, what they were using. I mean, is it mustard gas? Is it something else? Generally speaking, any kind of like airborne chemical weapon is a gas that's going to make you incredibly sick, melt your insides, bleed out of your eyes and ears. You know what I mean? Like all that BS you see in movies. If it's a
Mm-hmm.
chemical weapon and it's, it was in Syria, they're going to have something that's incredibly dangerous. Um, and honestly, I was I kind of hated that we had to carry the gear around because the
Mm-hmm.
base we were on wasn't very big. Okay, it's not like some massive airfield where like the missile's going to strike and be a big explosion, and then like there's going to be a radius where there's chemical stuff, and you're going to be like you need to have your gear on, right?
Mm-hmm.
The area we were in was kind of small enough that like if it was attacked and there was a missile or an explosion, that's probably going to kill you before the chemical stuff does. So
Yeah.
like what's the point? You know, to me honestly, and I'm not trying to be like tough. It was more of an inconvenience. It's a big bag. It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's
Plus all the
annoying.
stuff you're already carrying. It's
Yeah, and
hot.
when even in civilian clothes. So like I finished my work day, and at the time, this was, later on in my career when I was incredibly jacked, powerlifting, running around looking like a freaking NFL linebacker, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, I gotta go to the gym in civilian clothes. I'm going to the gym 3 times a day. So now I'm carrying this giant bag into the gym all the time. I also have to carry my gym stuff. I'm off work, and I'm just like, dude, if I'm gonna get hit, let me just get hit. Like, why do I need
If it's
to
gonna happen,
carry
let it happen.
this stupid, this stupid bag of stuff? And then the funniest thing, and I'm not gonna tell you what unit it was because people would get in trouble. So at the
Mm-hmm.
start of all of this, they brought us all into this building that we had, right? It was where we do all the intel briefs. It was kind of like a stadium style thing. There was like a watch floor down on the bottom and a bunch of seats that came up, and they brought everybody in the unit in, and everyone had to bring in their gear. And there was a group of SF guys out there, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to teach you guys how to use your masks and make sure we're going to give you a refresher." And so while they were doing it, they were like, "Hey, everyone, take off the filter on your mask, and your serial number, if it ends in a T, raise your hand." And the reason if a serial number ended in a T was bad is it was a training filter, and it wouldn't actually stop anything, right?
Oh wow.
And there was maybe like 180, 200 people out there, and about 90 people had training filters. And there was no way they were getting that many anytime immediately. So like half of the people out there would have been screwed anyways because they
Dang. So
didn't even have filters
making them work out for no
in a
reason.
deployed environment. And that unit, they didn't know. They didn't know that they sent out gear that had training filters. They had no idea.
Oh man.
So it was like,
Well, that's the army for you, right?
yeah, dude, that's classic Army, bro. The number of times I've seen, dude, air gas masks with training filters. I've seen soldiers get deployed, and when I'm checking their their plates in their IOTVs, they're freaking training plates, dude. They're not even ballistic. They're just a weighted piece of ceramic that does nothing. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, do the best
Go-
you can.
Go
Don't
get
get
new
shot.
plates immediately. No, you can get new ones, but so I would say that was like the most like I mean scared, but just the most like, well, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. You know.
That's well, that's awesome, man. You've always had that attitude that I've always, I guess, looked at you just like, the no, like, I guess that's why the army loved you, head first, and you're just
you really learn to thrive in chaos. If you're going to survive in the
yes.
military, you have to thrive in chaos. Something weird's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. Nothing's going to go to plan. And they kind of teach you what to do and how to react in those situations. And a lot of the really good leaders in the army are comfortable with making a decision within the confines of what they think is right, and then they'll stand by the consequences after. But yeah, it was definitely pretty wild just to be like, oh, well, half of us don't even have valid gear. This is great.
So were there any moments that were embarrassing, I guess, for you?
Embarrassing?
Yeah, I mean, I've known you for a long time, and there's no embarrassing moments I've ever been there with you.
No,
I mean, you had wrong here or there, but anything that you felt like you were like, I fucked up, or
all right. So straight up embarrassing. I had a soldier that I was taking to a promotion board, and when you take a soldier to a promotion board and you prep them and you train them, they're going to sit there in front of the board, and you're standing in the back, or you're like on the sidelines, and you're just like waiting, and they're answering questions, and they're getting quizzed and all this stuff, right? And this was a soldier that I had taken care of for a very long time. I made 100% sure that she was ready for the board. I like at one point she was in Kuwait and I was in Jordan, and I actually flew back to Kuwait the day before her board to prep her and take her to the board, and then fly back to Jordan, right? So like hopped flights to make it to be there to support her. And one of the questions they asked her was why you want to be an NCO, and why you would make a good leader. And she said something like, I want to be an NCO. I want to be I want to be a leader because I want to take care of troops, because I haven't had a good leader in my Army career yet. And the whole board looked over at me, and then so it was more embarrassing for her. She got like red in the face, and she was like, no, accept him. Like in basic and before him, like people wouldn't try. And she was trying to like backpedal out of it and like cover me.
Trying to bring, yeah.
But I was just like sitting there, and I was like, man, here I am hopping a flight from Jordan to Kuwait to come be here for you, and I'm not a good leader. No, you know what I mean? So she definitely didn't mean me. It was an accident. But the whole board looked at me, and I wasn't allowed to talk. So I was like, I just had to give him a look. Like, wait.
I don't know.
I'm not sure what, And then, you know what? Actually, I can give you another embarrassing, something that completely just slipped my mind. All right. So early in my career, when I was a young lad, I went out partying. I had actually just got back from one of those exercises I was on. So I was out for like 60 or 90 days, no drinking, right? While I was there, I broke up with a girl I was dating, and I came back late October, like Halloween weekend. So I went out partying. I got smashed. I blacked out, apparently tried to drive my vehicle, crashed it, got arrested. Never got a DUI, but went and spent a night in jail. It was a whole big thing. Honestly, that's not the embarrassing part. That's like, look, I made a mistake. My career recovered from it. Not a big deal. Fast forward like 5 years, maybe. My staff sergeant promotion board, one of the first sergeants that was sitting on that board was a platoon sergeant in the unit when I got my what would have been a DUI, but it wasn't. So I was a giant white guy in the South. So I wrecked my truck into a tree, broke off the axle. I blew like 0.15, bro, like double the legal limit. I was smashed. There's a video of me leaning on the front of the cop car. I'm wearing a Halloween costume, by the way.
No,
and
what were you?
Spartan warrior, jacked, bro, nipples hanging out, the whole nine. and I'm just lit. And the cop asked me, and I was like, dude, I'm super drunk. And then I blew like a 0.15, right? So
Oh
there's no way I'm getting out of this. And yet I got out of it because I was a giant white dude in the South, right? So I can't be mad. But anyways, so this dude who was a platoon sergeant in that unit is a first sergeant on my staff sergeant promotion board. And he goes, and at this point, my career's recovered. It's not in my records really because I didn't get a DUI.
Right, but it's still there that you...
But so, like, if people know about it, but, like, not really, right? So I'm at my promotion board, and he was, like, the third person to ask me questions, and I honestly didn't recognize him. So I'm crushing the questions, nailing it. I get to him, and he's like, well, I'm supposed to ask you about AR-670-1 and medical whatever, blah, blah, blah. But instead, what do you think of, like, how are you going to lead troops if your soldiers ever find out about that DUI you got? And just puts me on blast in front of everybody. And I was like,
were you just like shocked, completely just
bro?
stunned?
I didn't recognize him. So I was like, but when he started talking about it, he was like, oh yeah, you remember me from Fort Gordon? And I was like, oh shit. And then he does that, and I was like, this motherfucker. And so, you know, I talked my way through it. I gave some really good answers. Right. You know, I was like, hey, soldiers are going to make mistakes too, and they're going to be more likely to listen to somebody who's lived through it than somebody who hasn't. And nice. and he kept drilling me and trying to be a dick. And actually, after about 3 or 4 questions of me giving really good answers, and the sergeant major, the president of the board, was like, that's enough, first sergeant, and stopped him.
Oh, but I was like, what he was doing.
Yeah, okay. He knew he was just trying to, like, because the guy didn't like me, so he was just trying to get me in trouble. You know what I mean? So, like, that was kind of embarrassing because I was, like, not prepared for someone to dig up the past. Well, not dig it up, but just bring it up in that situation. Mm-hmm. I was kind of like...
I mean, you were at a moment where you were just like, I got this, pure professionalism, and then he just hits you out of nowhere with, you remember this one night?
Yeah, you remember this time, like, 5 years ago when you got fucked? I was like, damn, that's dirty, bro. That's dirty. Well,
I mean, I wanted to talk your ego down a little bit before I wanted to get to know you a little bit more. I mean, you've told me some stories, and I've been impressed already, but were there any moments that you felt that you were just a complete badass on top of the world and, you know, just enjoying life?
I mean, so feeling badass, right, there's a couple different, like, aspects of that. So, you know, when I was in Jordan, I was the NCOIC. I had like a $20 million hander seat. I was in charge of multiple teams of people, and being in charge doesn't make you feel like a badass, but taking care of them and making sure they didn't get, like, railroaded or run over or treated poorly by other people. So, like, that's a badass feeling, right? Knowing that your soldiers trust you and will come to you for help and guidance, and they know that you're there for them. That's a badass feeling, you know? So there's that, like, leadership side of feeling badass. And then there was a couple moments where, I mean, like I said earlier, you know, I was 6'2", 280 pounds, jacked. I got steroid tested multiple times in the Army. And there were a couple instances where just being in incredible shape kind of, like, saved the day, so to speak. And that kind of feels badass, you know? Stupid stuff, like, there was like a beautification crew. So soldiers that got tasked with, like, mowing lawns and, like, cleaning up the base got one of those riding mowers stuck in a ditch.
Okay. That's an interesting.
Yeah. That's what the Army calls it they call it area beautification when you're outside raking leaves. It's the way to make it sound glorious, right? But so there's a crew out there with a little riding mower. They got it stuck in, like, a little culvert, like a ditch. They couldn't get it out. There was, like, 3 soldiers. They were just, like, yanking on this thing, tugging it. They couldn't figure it out. I was driving by, just pulled over my truck, walked over, grabbed it, yoink, picked it up, set it on the grass, and they were all like, what the fuck?
Like, who's this?
What? Like, how did he just... Okay.
Because your nickname, if you're right, if I remember, was Hulk at this point?
Yes. So, I actually have a Hulk onesie from when I was powerlifting. And then I had on a call sign on one of my deployments, they called me Silverback One.
Silverback One. That's okay. Yeah. I mean, that in itself that's a badass feeling.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a good thing. You know, it was really cool. I got to train a lot of soldiers. I worked out a lot. So there's a couple of moments where just, like, physical strength kind of let me do some badass things. But, you know, honestly, I think just that for me personally, the most badass thing is really just the standing up for soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
On that same deployment to Jordan, I've talked about, there was an instance we ran these Trojan trucks. The Trojan trucks provide
Mm-hmm.
secured internet access to the NSA networks to soldiers who are deployed. And there's crypto and there's all these things that go involved with it because of what it provides. And there's legal requirements, right? So I was the ComSec custodian, communication security. I was in charge of that crypto. And if something happened with it, I literally went to jail.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were attached to a unit and we had a skeleton crew at night that was running this truck. And you have to, at a minimum, when there's active crypto, have 2 people guarding it. And they were like, hey, your soldiers need to do head count at the DFAC. So for like the midnight chow session, they wanted them sitting at the front door with a little clicker like they worked at Costco counting how many people ate. And I was like, hey, I told them, the trucks are up and running. They're legally, I have to have people up there. I'm not going to wake up my other guys. So we're just not going to do head count. I'm sorry. Like we're operationally here to help you. We're not administratively attached to you. So OpCon, not AdCon. And that unit's first sergeant just kept throwing a fit and pitching a fit and going and trying to talk to the officers out there and the DCO and all these. And finally, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do head count. I'm tired of arguing with you. So the next night, I told my guys, I said, hey, pull the crypto key, shut down the trucks, go do head count. And there was a team of probably 35 analysts working overnight, including a CW4. Chief Warrant Officer 4.
And so, this isn't familiar to your soldiers at this point. You telling them to go,
right? No. And they were like, why? Like we can't leave. We have the crypto. I said, pull the key, shut down the trucks, go to chow, go to head count. And they were like, and I was like, just do it. Just be quiet and do it. And no matter what anybody says, don't go back up to the truck until chow's over. And they're like, okay. So they do it, right? And this is midnight chow started at like 23:30, so like near midnight, and it lasted for like an hour and a half.
Wow.
Probably like 23:39, like dude, 10 minutes into chow, someone's pounding on the door the barracks room where I was sleeping, and there's like 16 other dudes in there. We're double bunked up, nuts to butts. We're just crammed in there. No one can move. They wake up everybody. Like, Sergeant Herron, why are the trucks down? Where are your soldiers? What the fuck? There's 35 people up there on mission with no access. And I was like, hey, go talk to your first sergeant. Get out of my room. What do you mean? I told your first sergeant she wanted my people on head count. I told them if they had left, they'd have to shut down the trucks because you have to have 2 on crypto.
Like, all eyes are on you two?
What?
All eyes are on you two just having this conversation?
Right. So there's like 15 people in the room and it's a CW4 that comes pounding on my door. And I'm like, I know what to tell you, Chief. Go talk to your unit's first sergeant. It's not my fucking problem. They told me we had to do head count. I told them what would happen if we did it. And they lost their shit and said, no, I have to do it. So I had to do it. The crypto key has been pulled. The trucks are shut down. The trucks will be back up when chow's over. And the guy's just losing his mind. He's like, I've got 35 people up there. We've got a live mission. Where did it? I was like, hey, go talk to your first sergeant. I don't give a shit. Go wake her up. So this dude storms over to the barracks where the females stayed, pounding on her door. She comes over to my door and she's like, pull your other soldiers, wake them up and have them covered. No, I'm not making someone cover an hour and a half in the middle of their sleep. Go fuck yourself. No, I told you what would happen. I had proof in emails. If you make my guys go, the trucks will be shut down. There's legal requirements for crypto. You said do it. Mission's down for an hour and a half. And so the chief at that point realizes I'm not budging. The first sergeant realizes I'm not budging, and they go get a full-bird colonel who's the DCO out there. And that guy comes to my door. And I tell him exactly, it's like the deputy commanding officer.
Okay.
And I explain everything to him. Like, hey, this is what's happening. And the guy looks at me, and he's like, go back to sleep, Sergeant Herron. And he turns to the first sergeant and was like, he told you in advance, and just starts destroying the first sergeant in front of everybody.
This is your barracks that he's having this conversation.
So this was outside of my barracks room on a foreign airbase that had probably 16 soldiers sleeping in it. They literally had us in bunk beds that had just enough space. It was a bunk bed and then a wall locker.
Dead ass quiet in there.
Everybody was when they left, everyone was laughing, bro, because they just. But like my whole thing was, you're not going to fuck my soldiers. Right. I don't care if I'm just at the time when I was doing that, I was an E5. I don't care if you're a
Mm-hmm.
CW4. I don't care if you're a fucking E8. I don't care if you're a fucking O6. You're not going to fuck my soldiers. And there's nothing you can do about it because I'm in charge. I'm
Mm-hmm.
operationally attached to you. I'm the highest ranking person in my unit. I told you that was going to happen. You didn't care. And now you're upset at the consequences that I told you in advance would happen. Deal with it.
Mm-hmm. So
And
what was the conversation outside that you guys heard?
oh, the DCO was just screaming at the first sergeant, like because I had proof that I told her exactly what was going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so what ended up happening as of that is they finally realized and understood and agreed, because this wasn't the first instance with them, that we were operationally attached to them and they had no control over me or my people. I could do whatever I wanted at that point, because for a while they were like, oh, you guys have to come do PT with us to make sure you're working out. No, I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I'm not administratively attached to you. You don't do our PT tests. I don't have to go to your formations. I don't have to do anything for you. I am solely the person in charge of everybody out here in my unit. They are here under my watch. And I had made sure of this with my unit back in Georgia, that was what was happening. And I was backed by my commander 100%. It helped that my commander and myself were gym bros. We worked out together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I had 100% backing from my unit, and I knew I was in the right. And so regardless of rank, I just got the shit on people, and
Right.
it was great. And that felt pretty badass because it was a mixture of like sticking it to the man and taking care of my soldiers at the same time.
Right. And you guys, I mean, it's all one, you said one campsite. So you guys still saw each other
Every day.
every
Day.
Oh my God. Well,
At one point, they tried to do a VTC, a video teleconference, back to my unit to tell on me to my commander. And
he didn't want to let it go. He
no,
wanted more of you. Oh
I
my God.
I had informed my commander of everything that's going on. So he sat there and he listened and he listened and he waited and he listened and he let the guy finish. And he's like, Sergeant Heron's doing exactly what I told him to do. He's in the right and you're wrong. Don't fucking call me again. And then hung up the BTC.
Oh
And I just looked at the guy and I was like, anything else?
my.
Get out of my tent. And because they were in like my tents that had the VTC system. And I was like, you can go now. So
and I wanted to see if we can bring up this story as well, because all of this is the same guy with the AC story.
Yes. So that same chief, that's the same guy. This motherfucker. I don't remember his name. If I remembered it, I'd tell you. So we ran the trucks, right? The SATCOM team. We ran the trucks that provided the internet, and we also had, because the tents were on my hand receipt, we had the generators that run an AC, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're in the desert. It's fucking hot, and the generators aren't. It's not the best equipment because it's the Army, and if you turned them down too low, they would freeze over, and turn to ice, right? Like literally freeze. Right. And then they'd have to thaw for like 45 minutes, and you'd have to like bang on them with a wrench to get them to restart. Mm-hmm. So we were like, hey, don't touch the equipment. It's our unit's equipment. We know about it. We know its limitations. Don't touch the equipment. And this dude, he was kind of overweight. He's kind of a fat, greasy fuck. So it's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's getting hot. He comes up and just cranks the AC down on a couple of the ACs.
Is this like midsummer? Like,
yeah, we were there in like August, bro.
Oh man!
And so he comes in, cranks the ACs down. Inevitably, they freeze, and then so when they froze, they would kind of sort of halfway work, or they would put out like 80-degree air instead of 70-degree air. This dude cranked it down to like 60. So we just turned off everything. Mm-hmm. Turned off the generators, turned off the ACs, and he came storming up. And because he kind of had to like walk around our little base, our little tent, right? And when he walked around, we had put up signs in slide protectors that said like, this is why you don't touch the equipment, and had them unplugged completely, just disconnected, not turned on. And there's so many computers and all the Intel equipment in the tent that they're starting to overheat. The laptops are crashing, printers are shutting down, like everything's going haywire. And we shut it all down. And the guy came up just losing his mind. And we're like, hey, Chief.
Hey, Chief.
I'm pretty sure we told you this is what would happen when you touch our shit. And you touched our shit. And he's like, turn it back on. Dude, no. We don't want to damage our equipment, so we're going to let it defrost fully. And when we're ready, we'll turn it back on. Mm-hmm. And he just, same guy, just losing his mind, just angry at it. And we're like, what do you want us to do, man? It's the equipment. You damaged the equipment. Like, I'm sorry, you know? So we had numerous run-ins with that guy. To be fair, we did get on his nerves on purpose a lot. So like I said, he was kind of a fat, greasy, pudgy human. And when he had a specific gait when he walked, he looked kind of like a penguin. Oh, and it was really obvious who it was from very far away, even if you couldn't see his name. Mm-hmm. So at the time, and I swear to you, I think they changed the regulation because of us. Me and one of my soldiers, we looked it up, and the regulation for like saluting an officer says 6 paces or when you recognize who they are. Now, if you go look, it just says 6 paces. I'm not even kidding you. So we would the camp we were in, it was kind of like in this rock quarry, and at the top of the hill above the quarry is where you had to walk up the hill, then go down into the quarry. That's where our tents were. And then the barracks we were staying at was at the bottom of the hill. So we would see this dude from like 200 yards away and be like, good afternoon, chief, and hold the salute the whole time. And at one point he was like, it's 6 paces. And we were like, nay, chief, it is 6 paces or when you recognize the officer. And he's like, how could you recognize me from 200 yards away? And at this point, right, we've been at each other 3 or 4 times. I was like, because you waddle like a penguin and just held the salute walking by. Yeah, dude, just like, because, and let me tell you a story about how fat you want to talk about how fat this guy was? I mean, he brought a tough box with him. So like you get to bring a box of gear. Oh, a big tough box, right? A big plastic box full of gear. Mm-hmm. His had 60 12-packs of Dr. Pepper in it. No. The only thing he brought in his tough box was Dr. Pepper. Because
are you kidding me?
He liked it so much. Yeah. He was literally drinking like 8 sodas a day while deployed. We would go on mail run. Okay, let me tell you, when we went and picked up mail, we had to drive through Saddam Hussein's hometown. It was this shitty little village where like we weren't even allowed to wear uniforms. We had to get dressed in civilian clothes and rent these like local little shanty buses to like try to hide sneaking through this village because of how dangerous it was. What? This dude would go because it was the mail was on this Marine base that was hella far away. This dude would go every 10 days that we did a mail run because the Marine base had an AFIS trailer that would have Dr. Pepper. So he was literally like risking his life driving through Saddam Hussein's home village to try to get a couple 12-packs of Dr. Pepper. That's how fat this greasy fuck was. So, damn. Yeah. Wow. Which explains why he wanted the AC, but
the man must have been sweating.
Yeah. He was sweating the 23 flavors and ingredients. That's what he was sweating.
Well, I mean, you spoke a little bit about Saddam Hussein. Was there any moments like that you actually ever feared for your life? Or was that, the only
No, I mean, I went on a couple of the mail runs, man. It really wasn't too crazy.
Mail runs? What's that? Like you just
we would go. So we were literally going to pick up mail because it all went to this Marine base. We were in civilian clothes, like renting vehicles. Like it was. I wouldn't say it was like fear for your life dangerous, but it was definitely like
you're on guard.
There was like shades on all the windows. And we weren't supposed to. We hired a local to drive us. We weren't supposed to be seen in that area, so it was kind of dicey. But
yeah, that's kind of dicey. That's the best
not
way.
Dangerous,
I mean, if that was me, that would feel pretty dangerous. I mean, because You've been there how long? This is how long into your career, I guess you could say.
That was probably 6 or 7 years in.
Okay. And how long was it that your whole career?
10 years.
Are you still considered active? Or?
No. I got medically retired because I got injured. So I was done in 10 years, and I never had to do the inactive reserve or any of that. So
can you go into your injury? How did you? This is on military. I'm guessing you got. Injured on base, or what happened?
So I was actually at one point, we had started this like team where we were doing powerlifting competitions. And we were doing this thing where we were trying to do a powerlifting competition and a marathon within 2 weeks of each other. So my career-ending injury was a back injury that had to do with powerlifting, actually, but because it was on an Army team, it was considered, it's service-connected. So that was like the career-ending. I crushed 3 vertebrae. I have nerve damage. Blah blah blah. But I was at one point I had thought like, oh, I'm going to be a badass and I'm going to go to Special Forces selection. And so I was training. I was training for that when I was like a younger soldier, and I tore my labrum in my shoulder and had shoulder surgery. And then I was like on a deployment when I was like hucking around equipment in the back of a trailer. I slipped off the trailer carrying equipment and like had shoulder surgery on my other surgery. You know what I mean? So like I've had numerous shoulder surgeries, numerous injuries, some bad foot problems from like heavy ruck marches. I jacked up my collarbone. They have this like training thing for like vehicle rollovers, and I like jacked up my collarbone, doing one of those. So tons of injuries, but the career ending, end all be all was actually like on this powerlifting team that we were training for.
So would you say that would be your biggest regret is your physical injuries, or is there something else that?
No, it's if I could go back. Okay, so I was bodybuilding before I got introduced to powerlifting. So I was pretty muscle, right? I would rather be pretty and not injured than be strong. I don't care what anyone says. Dude, it's cool to be like, I could deadlift 800 pounds. I could bench press 500 pounds. If Van ever rolls over, I could pick that shit. That's great, dude. Be strong if you want to be strong. But being strong got me injured, and it's my own fault. You know what I mean? I didn't do the right things. But if I could change one thing about my entire career, I would have just never started powerlifting. I don't care. I was already strong. When I was bodybuilding, it's not like I was weak. I was benching 405. I would squat 500 pounds. But like, I was strong, but I wasn't powerlifting strong. And there's a very big difference. And I would have just never powerlifted. Wouldn't do it. It's just not worth it.
Not for me as well. I'll say that.
It's not worth the central nervous system damage and joints and everything else you do. You know what I mean?
I'm pretty sure you feel it nowadays, right?
Oh yeah. I'm a wreck.
Well, I mean, is there any war stories that you feel that you're able to tell?
So I mean, like I said, I was an intelligence analyst. The way that works, the Army has like an agreement with the intelligence community where people in our MOS kind of get like, we're like on loan to the NSA or whoever, right? Whoever we're working for. And I wouldn't say it's a war story in terms of like I did anything, like war-y, but I would say like the coolest thing that I enjoyed about that career as an analyst was early on in my career. So earlier on in the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict, I was doing targeting. So I was building target packages on, different levels of targets, different priorities, and using methods which cannot be discussed, kind of like tracking them, understanding what their daily habits and activities were and where they went and all kinds of stuff. And, when you would put together a really good packet, you would send it to people and then they would go do something about it. And then at one point in my career, the guy that I was sending those packets to, who would decide whether or not they were getting actioned, when they were actioned, he would send back like a report to me and be like, this is what you helped us do. This is what we found. This is what you stopped. This is, your intelligence was good. So that was just super rewarding and cool to know that it was like that kind of direct effect, right? Because if I did something that took a cache of explosives out of the battlefield, right, I've saved countless lives.
Right.
And later on in my career, that process changed drastically. So earlier on in my career, when I was doing it, it was kind of like the Wild West out there, man. I would do up a package, I'd send it to a guy, and he'd be like, "Yeah, we're gonna action this. Let's go, yeehaw!" Oh, wow. Right? He'd ride out. Later on in my career, you would do a package, you'd send it to this approving authority. It would have to go to like a general who would review the intel. And by the time it got down to like a battlefield commander, it would be like 30 days old. And then maybe the intel's not good anymore. Maybe it is. Or you would hand it off to somebody and then they would, you know what I mean? So it just became this like the red tape, the bureaucracy of it all towards the end. But in the beginning, dude, we were just like like the guy would be like, here's the person I'm interested in, what can you tell me? And then I'd tell him some stuff and he'd be like, let's ride. So that was super cool.
Was like early 2000s, and when 9/11.
No, so I mean I was doing that stuff in like 2007 2008, so not like really early in the conflict, but still early enough that the bureaucracy hadn't taken over of it. It was still like what was considered like active war. So it just, and by the end, so that was 2008, and by like 2014 there was a huge change in like how everything went down. So I would say that was probably just like, for me, that part of it was the most rewarding out of my entire career, because I got to see firsthand and know that the work I was doing was saving soldiers' lives and saving civilian lives and like on the battlefield. So that was dope. That was like, all right, I'm having a good time.
So, I mean, that was the purpose of your position, right? That was what it was built, right? The whole NSA, that was, the whole dream of it. Now, of course, speaking of that, there was other things going on at hand, and there was a certain someone that spoke up about that. And how was that? How was that?
So when all that went down, that was at NSA Hawaii. And the cryptologic center there, it's called Rochefort, which is NSA Hawaii. I mean, you can Google NSA Hawaii and it's gonna pop up, right? So that's not a secret. It's in Wahiawa, right? And man, did things change there. We used to, there's a gym there on site, and they would let us like bring in burned CDs, and we'd like listen to music while we're working out. And like, you could have like, people would wear like their fitness trackers, like their Fitbits and stuff. And then when all that stuff went down with good old Snowden, man, you couldn't get a bag in there without being searched. CD, they were just burnt. Like, you'd come into the CD, they would just shred that shit right in front of you. It didn't matter. Every time you entered and left, there was no watches, no anything that transmitted, nothing that could have a USB port. He ruined just daily life,
right?
Not counting all the other stuff, just daily life for people was trash because of that guy. So
I mean, it's there's always good and bad things, in those stories. And in your personal opinion, if you can say, do you think it was a good thing for people to know that, or do you think continuing now to 2020, us not knowing, how would you feel about that?
So here's my take on it, right? Anyone who is in those positions, in the position I was in, you sign an agreement saying that you're not going to disclose anything. There's a lot of things that like you don't get to see the bigger picture of. You don't know what it actually means. So it's against the law to target U.S. persons. We're not allowed to do that. It's against the rules. So like, it's kind of this funny workaround. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but the ultimate end all be all of it is, it's there to keep Americans safe. And I would say what he did, while it sounds noble, and they're doing this and they're doing this, and what they're doing technically it's not illegal. It's not. Everything is set up in a way that protects Americans' rights. No one's out there just listening to everyone's stuff. So
because you gave us a clear example of how you did save lives.
Right?
They reported back to you what you did, and that did make a difference. And
so I think the issue is, and one of the things that that he talked about, right, is what's considered. So imagine communications, right? Cell phones, whatever, metadata, text messages, they're all put out there into the cloud, we'll say, right? So all of that stuff gets soaked up and kind of just gets stored somewhere, right? That's how it works. No one's allowed to go in and listen to it or look at it or view it where it's soaked up and stored. That's illegal. So what he kind of did was like scare people into being like, everything's being collected. They could do this, but they can't. It's not allowed. It's not the way it works. So he kind of like, and there's always going to be, like I said, it's the Wild West, right? So what I was doing in 2007 wouldn't be allowed in 2012, right? That difference in time. So I don't know. I think what he did was violate an agreement that he said he wouldn't talk about. I think he twisted a lot of the things that were happening to make it seem like it's worse than it was. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, everything the government does is perfect and no one does anything wrong, right? Because, dude, people bend the rules, people break the rules, people push boundaries, all kinds of stuff. But you know what there is for that? Congressional hearings and committees and oversight committees and committees that oversee the committees that have oversight on the other committees. And I think those people that are cleared and have Americans' interests at heart should be the ones making that decision on what gets released and what doesn't.
Right.
Now,
I mean, go ahead.
Well, it may not come out right away, right? So I think the big thing is, and I'm not saying there's anything, dude, by all means, if you're a quote unquote like whistleblower, like a real whistleblower, and there's something bad happening and you want to get it to light because it's so terrible and bad, do it, man. There's nothing wrong with standing up for what's right and doing it, okay? But there's a bigger picture involved where that kind of stuff that he put out wasn't like, oh my God, if I don't put this out, American lives are at risk. I would say the stuff he put out put American lives at risk. And because and if it were truly bad and they were breaking rules and XYZ whatever, it would have an oversight committee. It would have been eventually, and if it were bad enough that people needed to know about it, it would come out. Would it have come out right then? No. Would it come out 5 or 10 years later? Probably. Right. So I think you have to let those people and those committees do what they're designed to do, unless unless the whistleblowing is going to directly save American lives. I don't think he should do it.
No, I hear you, because a person is smart, people are stupid. And we see that a lot in America.
Yes.
If you cause panic and you just see what it does, and it just really gets people going, and anger and riots and all those things instill. But yeah, you made a lot of valid points there. And what would you say if you think he could come back to the United States, or should he still be?
If he comes back to the United States, he should go to jail. Because no matter like what, he violated an agreement. And I don't just feel that about him specifically, right? I'm not like a Blue Lives Matter, K-Kona, fucking always support the law, right? The law is not always on the right side, okay? But I think there are certain things like that where if you clearly break and violate a law, you should have to pay for it, and that's not hard to grasp, I think.
No, I think he understands it. That's why he doesn't want to come back. He knows what he did was wrong, but he felt something in him to say something. But that's also probably why he's not coming back, because of, he's heard around the world because of what he did. But some things also that the government has now put into light is some aliens. Now, with you in your position for so long, is there anything that you feel that you're allowed to say about unidentified phenomenons?
I never worked in any type of mission that would have had anything to do with that. I worked ground missions that covered Iraq and Afghanistan, and I worked towards the end of my career stuff in the Pacific Area of Command, which had to do like with Chinese nuclear submarines.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't do space stuff. So I mean, have I heard things about unidentified stuff? Sure have. Do I personally believe that there are unidentified things, technology that we don't know about? I sure do. And the government's come out multiple times and been like, we don't know what that is, right? They're starting to let
Right.
that loose. You know what I mean? So do I think it's a thing? Absolutely. Do I have any firsthand experience with it? I don't.
Let's see where we can go. And then how was life after the military now? Do you enjoy it? I mean, from the likes from my point of standpoint, you sound like you are having a great time.
I wanted to do 20 and retire, but I'm okay with what happened to me. I think I adapted rather well to being a civilian again. Obviously my injury kind of played a part in when I got out. And there's a lot of people dealing with a lot more serious stuff than me. I've got a few physical issues, a few minor mental issues, but I don't have any crazy PTSD. I wasn't blown up. I don't have any TBI. So, I would say that for a lot of veterans, it's harder to adjust that have some more serious issues than me. But I'm kind of a thrive in chaos, go with the flow kind of guy. So I think I'm going to adjust to whatever I do. So yeah, I'm enjoying being out because there are some things about the military that are just stupid. There's a lot of BS. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of weird things, that probably aren't for everybody. Like I've chaptered a couple people out of the Army. It's not that they were a bad person. It's that they were a bad soldier. So being a soldier is not for everyone, but that doesn't mean you're not a good person. Because there are a lot of things with the military that just don't vibe with a lot of people. Right. All of that being said, though, I really, truly appreciate the Army, everything it did for me, what it did for my character and development as a person, the friends I made, and I would do it again. If I could go back in time and be like, should I sign this or shouldn't I? I'd sign it again. And I think if you do more research than I did and you go into it knowing what to expect a little bit, and so you can prepare for that, I think the military, whatever it is, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, personally, if I could do it again, I'd honestly join the Coast Guard. But I think if that's something you feel you want to do, there are a lot of good benefits that come with it. There's the GI Bill, there's tuition assistance, there's the training you get, the camaraderie, the friends you have for life. I think it's worth it, and anyone who's interested should do it. But I think they should check out the Coast Guard for sure.
So if there's anything that you would tell younger Andrew, it would be to join the Coast Guard?
Join the Coast Guard 100%. Here's the thing. All right, listen. What's the first word in Coast Guard? Coast.
Coast, yeah.
You know what that means? Every Coast Guard base is on the freaking beach, man.
Oh, man. Okay, so you're making some good points.
Listen, and everyone gets paid the same. Like, there's incentive pay, and if you're airborne, you get like an extra $86. Great. But if you're like a special forces friggin' super commando ninja assassin, but you're an E6, you're getting paid as the same E6 that's a cook. Man.
So all this bad talk about the Coast Guard usually comes from someone that's been in the military, like Army.
No,
Marines.
Dude, there's no bad talk about the Coast Guard. People trash talk the Air Force and call it the Chair Force, and the main reason they do that is because they're jealous, because the Air Force has nice stuff. Bro, we had Air Force people that were quote unquote deployed to Fort Gordon, Georgia. They were deployed, air quotes here that you can't see, to an Army base. And you know what they got while they were there? It was at the NSA site there. And you know what while they were there, they received an incentive pay for substandard living. I'm not even kidding you. So the Air Force rented them these like corporate condos, fully furnished luxury condos off base. then gave them a substandard living allowance because they had to eat on an army base. They were like, the army base is so ghetto that we're going to pay you extra money. Right? So people in the Army and the Marines like to talk shit about the Air Force because the Air Force has everything better. And I make fun of all the branches, dude. Marines are crayon eaters. The chair force are giant pussies. They're really not, but you know, you it's what you do. It's all a brotherhood. Everyone makes fun of each other. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone make fun of the Coast Guard because most people probably don't even know the Coast Guard exists. They probably don't even know that the Coast Guard is a Department of Defense like entity. You know?
No, they probably just think it's like the police.
They probably just think it's like a state thing, like, or it's no, dude. The Coast Guard is the way to go, man. Go join the Coast Guard, get stationed on the beach, hang out on a boat all day. I met a Coast Guard guy in Hawaii. For the first 8 years of his career in the Coast Guard, he was stationed in Florida. You know what he did? He drove around, he rowed. He wasn't the captain. He rowed around on a Coast Guard boat that patrolled the border and shot drug submarines, like the unmanned submarines, out of the water with a 50 cal machine gun. This dude's job was to play duck hunt all day. He'd just up on a 50 cal. They would detect the little submarines full of drugs, and he would blast them out of the water. That was that guy's job for 8 years.
Thinking about it, you got Miami is a huge drug trade where they just go in from that. So, I mean, now that you said that, just thinking about it, the Coast Guard would be stationed up there.
The Coast Guard, there's Coast Guard bases along the entire coast of the country. There's Coast Guard bases in Seattle, there's Coast Guard base, or in Washington, they're in California, they're in Florida. They're the Coast Guard. They guard the coast. They're all along the coast, man. They're southern, Texas, down in the Gulf of Mexico, east and west. There's a Coast Guard station in Hawaii. I don't know, dude. Hawaii is militaried up. I mean, it kind of has to be based on its proximity to the east, right? But there's everywhere the Coast Guard is on the ocean, and the ocean is beautiful.
And so are you in the military done? It's just retirement from them.
Yeah, I wouldn't go. I mean, they wouldn't take me back because I got, fat and old. But I support the military. I would do something with the military in terms of like as a veteran. I'm a member of a veteran like nonprofit. I do stuff to help veterans still. I would do stuff active on a base to help active duty. One of the jobs I had when I got out of the Army was actually working for a program on a base out here in San Antonio. So I support and appreciate everything the military did for me. But I mean, I wouldn't go back if they'd take me, and they wouldn't take me. So
they wouldn't take you either.
You know what I mean?
I'm ready, Chief. Nah,
you got to be honest with yourself.
Well, I mean, that's it really for I had for you, buddy. I felt like I've got to know you a lot better now. I mean, we've only known each other through work. So, just taking this step out of that and just to getting to know you as a better friend and about your past is really interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, man.
I always call you the wizard because how you are freaking tech savvy. Yeah, man, it's been a pleasure talking with you today about this. And
I mean, I appreciate the invite and talking to you, and it's good to hear what you have to say and what you have to think, and hopefully we'll get some time to hang out somewhere in the future.
Well, that about wraps it up for today's show. Thank you again for everyone who listened this long. Thank you again for Andrew for coming on to the show. And this has been the Same Shit, Different Day podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.